Welcome to the FTS podcast today. I am here with Mina and Mädchen Amick.
Amick. Long A's.
Amick.
But you got the Mädchen right.
You got the
that's
Mädchen
the
right,
hard one.
which that is the hard one.
I know when you said your name, I made sure to listen very hard.
Yeah.
How are you guys doing today? We're in DC.
We're in DC.
How's the trip been?
It's been great.
Yeah.
We've gone Boston, New York, now DC. Mina's going back to New York.
Back to New York.
Then she's going up to Ithaca, but
Yeah.
we're meeting all of our great partners and meeting new people in the mental health space and really collecting lots of good info for the future of Don't Mind Me.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about Don't Mind Me. It's a foundation.
Yep, 501c3 nonprofit. Yeah, it's a family-founded nonprofit for mental health by my family and I, my mom, me, my brother Sly, my dad David. And it was, we began with my brother's journey into mental health. So he's a year older than me, and he went off to UC Irvine on a track scholarship, and he was the man on campus and had done everything right. And he was walking home one night on I think it was his freshman year, and unfortunately witnessed a death on campus. So he was a kid fell from a third story window, and my brother tried to save his life, and unfortunately he didn't make it. And that was, looking back, the trigger for my brother's bipolar diagnosis. But first it presented as substance use and PTSD. So we were trying to treat it in that way as a family coming together, trying to understand the behavior. But then once the drugs had cleared his system, he still had behavior that we didn't recognize.
Yeah. And his first psychiatric hospital visit was a long one because he had cleared all substance, and they said that, we feel like there's an underlying diagnosis here, and doctors are suspecting bipolar disorder because he's not clearing psychosis. So that began the first kick in the gut, like, oh my God, what is this? What does this mean? And kind of like having to come to terms with sort of mourning the loss of where you're the trajectory you thought your child would grow. But life had other plans for us all.
Yeah. So we're all artists, and we started using our platforms to talk about our story and talk about advocacy for mental health and just spread a little bit of awareness and be candid about our experience so that other people can open up as well. But that didn't feel like enough over time, because when my brother was back in the psychiatric hospital and things were worse, we're like, well, what has this really done for us right now? So we started Don't Mind Me in 2021.
Yep.
We're about 4 years old now.
10 years after his diagnosis.
Wow.
Yeah. And
he was back in psychosis and in mania, and we were back in the mental health care system.
Yeah.
And it was more broken than before.
Yeah. So we wanted to focus on the advocacy piece, but then also add our pillars of action and access, because it's such a not accessible system. It's so expensive. So that was just kind of our origin story.
I was totally not aware that an experience could bring on like something like bipolar.
Yeah.
Like that's mind blowing. Like PTSD and addiction makes sense, but I would have never guessed bipolar.
Yeah. It's usually some kind of traumatic trigger that can expose an underlying predisposition to a mental illness. And for my son, it was bipolar.
And we always wondered too, and this is something I actually learned somewhat more recently. And I went into my psych degree and I wanted to learn more about it. That's kind of how I was coping at the time, was just I was already wanting to be a psych major, and I was like, I want to be on the biopsych side and understand mental illness. But more recently, I was talking to my therapist, and I was like, what if he never saw this event happen? Would he never have presented any symptoms ever? And she said, well, with bipolar, it'll come out one way or another. So it usually is a traumatic incident. It could be a breakup. It could be substance use. It could be something environmental, but it'll present itself.
I mean, it can be any kind of trauma.
Yeah. But that was almost I don't know what the word is, but you feel that guilt of like, was there anything that could have happened differently in their life? And I guess it's a little bit of solace in it's there, so it'll present itself at some point in their life.
You have a psych degree.
I do.
What's your intention with that?
Yeah,
To be
great question.
She's going to be running the Don't Mind Me Treatment Center.
So initially, because when my brother was going through this, he was a sophomore. I was a freshman. I was going to Cornell across the country. So I was very removed from it. So I already wanted to go into psychology. I don't know why. Maybe there's more to that, but I've always just loved the brain and why people do what they do.
Yeah.
So then that made me go more into the concentration of the biopsych side versus like social psych. But I always knew I wanted to be an artist.
Yeah.
So I felt like I was also on the track team. So I wanted to be a performing arts major, but there was too much conflict. Like everything that I wanted to do with theater or music was during practice. So I was like, what's the next best thing at a great place like Cornell? And psychology felt like something that could also apply to my writing and acting and music. Like it's just all can feed into storytelling and just understanding people in general. But now that we have the nonprofit, it's definitely kind of come back into just, I mean, it's a general knowledge of psychology, but there's a lot that I can now pull from doing what we do with the foundation.
You started the foundation 10 years after his diagnosis. So why, like, what was that point? It was because you saw that the mental health space was kind of not doing well?
So, Sylvester, Sly, he was managing his diagnosis. He had some challenges along the way and then some successes and in and out of treatment, sober livings, psychiatrists that would come and go, unfortunately. So he would get a good regimen with one psychiatrist and then they would leave the field or for some reason he needed to go to a new psychiatrist and then they would change a medication and so then that would have effects. So it was a hard 10 years, and he ended up destabilizing again and going into severe mania and psychosis at that 10-year mark, just coincidentally. But it was also in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So challenging for everyone. And it just happened to be the 10-year marker that we were deep into trying to find psychiatric hospitals and treatment centers that were dealing with primary mental health. A lot of them call themselves dual diagnosis, and it's just not enough care for those that are primarily dealing with a mental illness. And there is a co-occurring disorder there, obviously. There's self-medication, but a lot of the places are calling themselves dual diagnosis, but they don't have the psychiatric doctors on staff.
Yeah.
They're not providing the proper support and education on the psychiatric side. So we had been talking about one day wanting to start a foundation, and we were just in full chaos at the time, to be honest. And we were like, all right, we got to do something. We got to roll up our sleeves and do something about it and be a part of hopefully the healing and bringing people to resources, what few resources there were. So that's why we started it. And we actually did a podcast at the same time that kicked off the nonprofit. So it's real time. You're going through the motions with us as a family. We're talking through what it's like to be in crisis, what it's like to try to find help for your loved one. Lots of tears, lots of laughs.
She's the crier.
Just for me? Okay. No, I think there were some other people.
Yeah.
Maybe my husband.
Yeah, Dad. But it was just maybe that divine timing or maybe not, but like we were planning on recording that week that he went back into psychiatric care. And so the conversation, and we were planning to do it with him and to talk about our experience with him. And
as a family.
And so we were like, do we push it? And we were talking with the production team at the time. And we were just like, actually, this is the perfect timing because this is what it's like as a family to be going through it right now. And maybe like once he's healthy, he can come back and give his perspective, which he did later on. But it was mental health doesn't wait for the right time to present itself. So it was kind of like, well, let's dive right in. This is when we need it the most. And I'm sure somebody else does too.
Yeah.
There was a few things there. It is funny that they call it dual diagnosis. Because I see it as one thing, as somebody who struggles with both like mental health and addiction.
Yeah.
It's like, isn't addiction a mental illness?
Yeah.
And, like substances are removed from my life, but the addictive
Yeah, it's still part
tendencies
of
are
mental health.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they
I
still
think
show
it's
up in my life
shifting
today.
more and more. We've just seen over the past 15 years that it really, I think it is starting to merge more, as it should. It's like this all falls under the mental health umbrella, but there is a lot of stigma. I mean, in any diagnosis that you talk about, but with addiction, there still is that extra stigma of that it's a personal choice and it's a lifestyle and it's all of these things. And the more that it goes under the mental health umbrella and it's a diagnosis of you treat it that way, it's not just like a tough love treatment, it's a mental health treatment. We've been talking a lot about the tough love of it all.
Yeah, because at first you're, as a family, you're counseled and you're guided when you're supposedly just dealing with the substance use disorder side of it. All of these boundaries that you need to make as a family or as the supportive loved one, the tough love, this and that. And I remember that, we were following those rules, thinking we're doing the right thing, and told my son, you can't use under our roof. And he walked out the door and said, I hope to see you again one day.
See? No, I'm just kidding.
It's okay. But I really appreciate the perspective of the mother of somebody who struggled with addiction, because my drug of choice was Xanax and alcohol, and I'm not on planet Earth when I'm under the influence of those substances. So I wasn't really seeing the effect on my parents. So I today, now in my recovery, I have to take that look back and see what effect does that have on parents.
Yeah. Well, and so then, I talked to his psychiatrist and said, unfortunately, we had to put up the boundary and this and that, and he left, and his psychiatrist at the time said, no, this actually not, he's not in his right mind to be out on the street. He's sick, he's in psychosis, he's not making the right decisions. And so then I went into full panic mode, and it was like, oh my God, we got to find him, we got to bring him back. And that was the moment that things shifted for me, when I really understood and had to really learn and to separate my son from when, his diagnosis, when his brain is sick, it's making him act in certain ways that, isn't my son with a healthy, stable brain. So try to share that wisdom with families that think they gotta they gotta hit rock bottom and you gotta do tough love. And it's
really, what is there isn't a blueprint or
guidelines
or a to-do list with helping somebody in your family struggling with addiction. Personally, what would you say to somebody as a sister and as a mother for having your son or your brother struggling with addiction? What would you say to somebody
that's actually struggling?
Yeah, active.
There's hope and there's healing, and you've got to really find your way, find the people that you trust that are there to help guide you toward it. And to everyone else around that person, it takes a village, it takes a family, it takes a neighborhood, it takes friends and family. It's, if somebody's dealing with cancer and you're like, oh, you've come out of remission, oh, I guess you're not making the right choices in life. No, of course not. You're going to support that person all the way through, being in remission or being in active fighting the cancer. So this is just happens to be a different organ in our body that's being affected. Unfortunately, it affects their behavior. And so it's very hard as a family member to separate that behavior. But it's just their brain is unstable and their brain is sick, and they've gone into primary, primal mode where they're needing to get that substance, and their brain isn't thinking it's the rational way.
Yeah, and I think it's hard, especially if you're new in the space, if it's a new diagnosis or these symptoms are new that are presenting in your loved one. It can feel, first of all, scary, and we want to jump to conclusions and maybe put the blame on that person of well, if they had only done this and that, and they're saying these hurtful things, and so I'm not going to engage, or whatever that looks like. And I think it's understandable because it's a very difficult thing for anybody to be a part of, but you have to educate yourself on what the symptoms look like, because we were just, or more so you, but you were helping a family friend who's going through, their sibling is clearly experiencing mania, and this is it seems like her first time understanding it. And there is so much, even before we can even get to like, how do you help this person? It's like, well, he said this and he did that and he spent all of his money and he had all, and they're getting stuck on the symptoms of the disease instead of going past that and being like, okay, these are the symptoms of the disease. How can we help them? It's not personal, and separating the person from the mood disorder, from the mental illness is difficult, but you get used to it over time. But when it's new, you just have to work through it and just educate yourself.
It's very hard to separate it.
Yeah, because it hurts. Like the things, even if you know that going into it, it still hurts. It doesn't change that.
Yeah,
that it's a difficult thing to go through. But once you see it, it's almost not a relief, but it's almost like a blueprint where you're like, oh, it's literally the same things that people say, or the way the symptoms
in mania
present.
And psychosis. So many similar symptoms.
Yeah.
It's across the board.
Yeah, what is that as somebody looking at somebody experiencing mania and psychosis? What is that like? Like what were you experiencing and what did you witness?
Rapid speech.
Yeah.
Risky behavior, grandiose thoughts.
Meaning
and
like
actions.
that person may think that they've got the best idea in the world and they're going to put all their money into it, and
all the way to becoming
God.
a president.
Yeah, the president, their God, those kinds of thoughts.
There can be a hypersexuality. A lot of times they have similar, like, oh, I'm part of some experiment, and I know that you're not really my mom. That you're in on this.
A lot of paranoia.
A lot of paranoia comes with that. And so it's really, and my therapist really helped me through, because I was really trying to understand, like the things that were being said, and some of it seemed like it was based in reality, and then some of it was absolutely not. And my therapist said, so if somebody walked up to you and said, I just took a tab of acid, and then started acting a certain way or talking a certain way, what would you think? And I said, well, they're clearly high on something. And she says, you have to understand that your son's brain chemicals are like he's on that acid.
Wow.
And that really helped me separate when he's sick from my son and my son's actions and behaviors. But it takes time. It's hard. Like Mina was saying, for a friend of mine that's going through it right now, I mean, the family's panicking and they're really fixating on, look at these disturbing drawings and look, I totally, traded in the car to get a new car and all of these things, and he doesn't remember emptying his bank account and this and that. It's just like, you gotta look past all that. Those aren't his actions. He's not well right now, and he needs help.
I wanted to dive a little more into the stigma with all of this, with mental health and addiction. First off, like, what were your guys' thoughts on mental health and addiction before Sly experienced all of this, and then now? And what do you think the common misconceptions are, and like, what are the stigmas you guys are trying to break?
I mean, I think memory, something I learned in my psychology undergrad, the one thing you should never rely on is your memory. We have a very terrible memory. So for me, my memory is I've always been cool with mental health and and mental illness, and was always very understanding of it. But I think that could be retroactively being like, oh, I've always understood it. But with that in mind, I think it was interesting. We were recently trying to find a certain date of when things were happening for my brother, and I was going back through my Facebook messages to at that time his teammates were reaching out on Facebook, being like, something's off with your brother, you should come get him. That was in like 2011, and I remember I saw a message that I had sent to one of his friends, and I was like, oh, it looks like it's an addiction thing. We're gonna try and do whatever we can, and hopefully he'll get it together. And so I was like, oh, I wasn't quite as evolved as I thought I was.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think in general, we've always been a very understanding family. We're a family of artists. We move around a lot. I've been to, a bunch of schools, seen every type of person. So I think in general, I was a very open-minded person. But even with that, there was so much room to grow and there was so much to learn. As far as the stigma, I don't know. I feel like we were always aware of mental health, but to a certain degree.
Testament to the parents over here.
Totally.
Just saying.
I love that.
Absolutely.
Well, I mean, because then I can sort of talk about like the way that I was raised and what was happening in my family, And when my son was going through his early diagnosis, the doctors were asking, so is there any mental illness in your family? And asking my husband and myself. And he was adopted, so he doesn't know his family history. Since then, he's actually learned, because he had found a sister, and the sister has been looking into it. So there is indications in some records that she was dealing with bipolar. But on my side, I was asking my mom, because my dad had already passed, do we have, mental illness in the family? The doctors are asking, and she was like, no, can't think of it at all. No, nothing. And then about, I think it was maybe 5 years later, I was helping her move, and we were coming across these beautiful paintings that she had. And she's like, oh, that was painted by my Aunt Emily, and that was painted by my Aunt Lorraine. And, Aunt Lorraine was a better painter, but I just didn't really know her. And I was like, oh, why didn't you know her? And she said, oh, she lived her entire life in a mental institution. And I'm like, Mom. So remember when I was asking? And she was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. But that's the generation that sweeps it under the rug. You don't talk about it. That person's gone and out of the family now. So the stigma needs to be broken. Fuck the stigma.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah, it's like, what are we doing? Why is there stigma? It's like we got to get with it. We have to understand, brain health, and is there stigma attached to having a cardiac issue? Is there stigma attached to when you get cancer? There's actually an understanding and outpouring of love and support, but when it comes to the brain, there's this immediate like, oh, there's something wrong in our family. Let's cover it up. Let's shove that to the side, and that doesn't do anybody any good. We have to get rid of it. So, but I have to say that I wasn't educated. I don't think that I had a stigma, but I just wasn't educated. So I had come across actually someone that I worked with, an actor, and he was absolutely, now in hindsight, he was absolutely having a manic episode. And I remember at the time, I just was like, what the hell's going on? Like, keep him away from me. He seems very dangerous. I wish I would have known now what I knew then, and I maybe could have been helpful to him and not been so afraid of his behavior. And that's just happened with education and time and seeing my son go through it on a very intimate level. And I feel like I have a bit more, I was always compassionate about people that were, living on the street or seemed to definitely be in some kind of mental episode that you'd walk by, where a lot of people are afraid and don't want to be anywhere near it. I'm not afraid of it anymore because I know what's going on. Of course, you have to be careful if somebody has violent tendencies. But, I feel like I can talk with them and ask them if they need help and see if I can connect them to something in their neighborhood that might help. And I don't have that fear anymore, and that came with education.
For sure. How was like your guys' mental health through all of this? Like, have you guys personally struggled with mental health or have had to seek out therapy or anything of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about how we probably would have never gone into therapy ourselves if it wasn't through this journey with my brother. And for me, I'm definitely a white knuckler. I'm a type. I wouldn't even say I'm type A, but I'm maybe some would. Yeah, you got a little.
Maybe a type A plus.
Like a 99, 100%.
Yeah.
But I definitely had a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety and bottle things up throughout my whole life. But it served me for a long time. So I was like, well, this is the way you do it. And I think there is a lot of culture. Like I was an athlete and I went to an Ivy League school, and there is kind of that culture around the less sleep you get and the harder you work and the more you hate your life, like the better you're doing in a way. And I kind of bought into that to a certain degree.
And you've always been a perfectionist.
And I've been a perfectionist.
Which I relate to because I'm a perfectionist myself, but you put a lot of pressure on yourself.
Yeah. So I think that probably would have gone untreated forever if eventually I went into DBT for going through my own issues during the pandemic, dialectical behavioral therapy, which I loved, but I was resistant to go into it. Why, right? After a decade of my brother going into many therapies, but I was like, oh, but for me, I'm okay, which again is probably a stigma thing. Even if like being as open and having talked about it and advocated for so long, I still was resistant to go in myself. I'll admit, but but when I went into DBT, it was so helpful, and it was a combination. It was a very intensive program, combination of group therapy, individual therapy, coaching, and I was very, very hesitant about the group therapy because I was like, I don't want anyone to see me not perfect, like working on something. And I was like, I can do the individual. We can talk about it in private, but in a group, I don't know about all that. And it was like, that was the best part of it. And so I'm very thankful to have gone through that. And I'm now in therapy still. And I know that you got into it wanting to be the best mom you could be and caregiver you could be, and then realize you had.
So there was a program my son went into, and it was more on the SUD side. Yet another reason. It was a very accredited program, but they just weren't able to handle the primary mental health needs that my son was going through. But they had a week family course, and it was really educational. It was great. And so there was one exercise, and they totally like set us up. They set it's probably me up and stuff, but like they start to talk about the different members of the family and what they tend to do in an addiction household. And so, but they were like going through like, are you this kind of person? Do you like to come in and figure it out? Yes. And then do you always pretty much figure out the right thing? Yep. And then, just all of these things. And so I was just proudly raising my hand, and then they're like, okay, you're the hero of the family. And I was like, of course I am.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for recognizing that. And then they like had me come up to the front of the class, put my little cape on, and then they had everyone else in the family do their thing, the quiet one in the family, and and then as they were going through the exercise, it made it very clear that it was not the greatest tendencies that I was leaning into. But I grew up with a childhood that was pretty chaotic, and I was always having to sort of be the hero growing up. So I kind of fell into that pretty easily. So, but then through that, I started therapy because I definitely felt like I went into therapy because I wanted to be the best mom I could be for my son. So I sought out a therapist to be like, okay, teach me how to be the best
superhero.
Superhero. And very quickly learned, there's a whole bunch of other stuff I need to unpack and go through and deal with. And so, and I've changed therapists along the way because one was great for a while, and it was kind of perfectly what I needed. And then that 10-year marker when, really getting intensely and just so afraid to lose my son, I just felt like I was feeling the trauma like physically in my body. So I was like, I think I need some different tools here. And so Mina actually recommended a therapy group that did a little different. So I went through CBT and I liked it because it gave me some some homework and some skills to really work on, and so I've continued that. But of course, I went in it to be the hero mom.
Yes, your intention changed, which was good.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Yeah, tell me a little bit about what Don't Mind Me does today. Like, you guys are opening up a treatment center.
Yep.
How did that come about? Why?
Yeah, I think so. The origins of Don't Mind Me was the advocacy piece, because I think from 2011 up through the pandemic, it was so much about breaking the stigma. It was so much about just trying to get people to listen and to be vulnerable about mental illness. And I think for us too, we're talking about SMI, serious mental illness. We're trying to break the stigma around all of mental health, but there is a spectrum. And I think post 2020, the stigma has gotten a lot better as far as people are definitely talking about mental health. A lot of people suffered through the pandemic, And I think depression and anxiety are a hot topic, and it's great, but there's still a lot of stigma around schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and then all the mood and personality disorders. So for us, we just talk a lot about our own story, but we have 3 pillars. It's advocacy, action, and access. So that's our advocacy is our speaker series, talking about our story, opening up the conversation with others in a very vulnerable and real way.
To make sure people know they're not alone.
Yeah.
You know?
And then then moved into our access pillar. So we've just experienced so many times that we see the most insane bills for 30 days. It's like $100,000 to go in, no refunds. So
for 30 days. For 30 days.
And so many issues with that. One, $100,000, who has that? Even if you do have it, 30 days. That doesn't solve most people's issues. There's a very antiquated model of 30 days.
And I'm sorry for what you're experiencing in those 30 days. I don't think it's worth $100,000.
No.
And so and it takes almost that mark, which I'm sure you know. It takes the brain about like it's almost like this perfect little like 28-day marker. That the frontal lobe comes back online.
Exactly.
So now it's just now coming back online.
And you're kicking me out.
Back to your job, back to school, back to your family. Yeah. And I think we just saw, first of all, it's so inaccessible. So that means that most of the population will not be getting the care that they need. But even again, let's say you're in that top percent, you can't afford it, which good for you. But then it puts a lot of pressure on those families that people are raking out their life savings to get somebody into treatment, and they're not fixed in 30 days. So then there's pressure on the person themselves to be like feeling that shame of I'm not better. Yeah. And that's my fault, clearly, because the system said we'd be fixed in 30 days. Yeah. And then the family doesn't want to, they're like, we already gave you everything. This is now on you to fix from here. We've just seen that so many times. So anyway, we moved into our crisis intervention scholarship fund, and that's getting people into treatment who can't afford it or their insurance drops out, and it helps them finish their treatment. And then that didn't feel like enough. So last summer, and we've always had a dream of one day opening our own treatment center and doing it in a way that we feel like could make a big difference and making it accessible to everyone. So last summer, we were made aware of this big grant coming into California. It's in the B-CHIP grant, so Behavioral Health Continuum Infrastructure Project.
Wow.
Yes! Wow. So $3.3 billion is coming into the state to build out behavioral health and SUD services. So there was this great treatment program that my son went through down in San Diego, Mental Health Center of San Diego, and those 2 co-directors said, hey, you guys have been talking about opening a treatment center. There's some grant money coming into the state. If you really want to do it, we'll help. So we assembled a team and identified a property. We have an incredible architect team that's put together the renderings and the floor plans. And so we applied for this big grant. We didn't get round 1, but there's 5 rounds, so we're going for round 2. And what we're trying to do with this model is not only a full recovery campus, so taking you through all levels of care, from crisis stabilization, sobering center, detox, into residential for a long-term approach, because as we said, this can't be fixed in 30 days, and then to a robust outpatient that continues to support you throughout your life. And then within that, really treating the whole person, vocational skills, nutrition education, dealing with inflammation. We'll have a research component to it because there's so many, all mental health seems to be working in these silos. And it's one of the last fields to actually share information about what's working for what diagnoses and what medications are working and therapies are working. It's so really creating a great, because we'll have a large population, being able to, show some great stats for things. But the biggest thing is making it accessible. So combining, for California, Medi-Cal, but that would be Medicaid anywhere else in the States. But also the private insurance, private pay, and then scholarships. So, hopefully if you come to us, you meet medical criteria, we're not going to turn you away for financial reasons.
I love that.
So we have to make it accessible to people.
Yeah,
100%.
and with my brother and with so many people we know, but that's just our most direct experiences. You lose so many people in the transitions from care to care. So it's like, let's say you were in an emergency situation, you went to a psychiatric hospital or an ER, and then it's time to transfer to the next place, and then you got to find the new place, and it's in those gaps of either you're discharged too early or you find somewhere and your insurance doesn't match up, people lose hope, lose interest. They go back to old environments.
Ways. Yeah.
So it's for us having a campus where you have a smooth handoff as you level down, and you have a team that knows you, that knows your story, because there is so much of re-traumatization every time you have to re-explain your story to the new treatment team. So having somebody where it's like they know who you are, they know what you need, there's no missing medication, and we've had so many experiences of one team deciding he should be on one medication and another being like, oh, we don't need that, let's try this new thing, and you mess
Or
people's...
so many treatment centers that like won't allow my son to be there if he's on 2 antipsychotics.
Yeah.
It's actually quite common to mix the antipsychotics, you know, for depending on your brain chemistry and what works best. So the times that I've had to advocate for him and make sure that the new team knows, no, these are the really important medications. He absolutely needs these, and just being on top of it, because he's so many times, you know, he's not well. He's not able to advocate for himself. So having that continuation of care and the team that's gotten to know you, they know what works. That's
so
dream.
important.
Yeah.
Because I was in the recovery community in LA, and the amount of people I've met that say that they're tired of sharing their stories, they're tired of going in and out of treatment. It's very common that I've seen people go in and out, and it hurts to see, but they're tired of sharing their stories, and they just feel like nothing works and people don't care. Yeah. And for me, community and like seeing the same people around every day was what hit home. Yeah, which I think too with addiction recovery, what I think is done very well in a lot of places is there is a really great community aspect, whether it's through AA or whatever program you're working, that I think mental health will need more of. It, There needs to be that more like long-term, lifelong approach to having that peer-to-peer or that mentorship that I think is really great on the addiction side. So we're trying to implement a lot of that on the outpatient and community side of what we want to do.
There's a really great, have you heard about the clubhouse model? Mm-mm. So there's some great clubhouses. Fountain House is a great one in New York. And the clubhouse model is really like the group community environment. And you can come there, it's safe. It doesn't cost anything. You just have to come with a diagnosis. But if you feel like you're struggling and you haven't been given a diagnosis, they can help connect you to someone that can assess you and give you a diagnosis. But everything that they're doing on the community side is very much in line with what we're wanting to do with the campus. So right now, the goal is to open a clubhouse type for the community part of it, and it's volunteer based, and which that open door makes it people feel safe to be there and find community, and they provide groups all day long. They provide meals, education. And then we want to build out the clinical side to support that community. So focusing on bipolar for our first phase, because we know it so well and it's such a wide spectrum and really needs that, that focused care, and then build diagnoses by diagnoses.
How is Sly doing today? Is he doing better?
He is. Yes. Yeah. He's a certified peer specialist.
That's awesome.
And he's doing really well now. He's got, I think, like 18 months sobriety now. Oh, wow. And in fact, there was a medication mix-up at one of his treatment centers. They actually just didn't refill it for 3 months.
They just forgot.
And so he went into a spike of mania, but he got on top of it himself. Wow. For the first time, checked himself into the hospital and didn't use, and got on top of it. It was a bummer, and he was like, I just lost like 3 months because it took a while for him to stabilize, but it's like this is the journey, and he stepped up to take care of it.
And touching on what, I forget which one of you said it earlier, it's not something that is just cured. Right. And we expect like, oh, you can get cured in 30 to 45 days. Like even to this day, my mom is like, You're cured. They helped you. You're
I know.
I know. Now.
Yeah.
That's because as moms, we want that to be the case.
Yeah.
I remember when my son went into his first, it was a great treatment center in Los Angeles. They were really sweet. And in one of the like family sessions, somebody mentioned like, oh, relapse is part of recovery. And I just was like, oh God, what? No, I need him to be fixed. I need this to be like done. It was just too scary, but I mean, it's part of it, right? So there's ebb and flows. As long as there's like 2 steps forward, if there's 1 step back, you just keep moving forward. You got to get back on recovery
and zoom out of what that graph might look like. Like maybe it's like this, but it's like the whole thing's going up.
Yeah,
and that's sometimes
see
hard
the big
to see.
Perspective.
Yeah, especially for them. Like it's easier for the family and the loved ones to see. Like, but remember where you were 10 years ago. But for them, it feels like every step back is them doing the wrong thing. Yeah, but it's not. You have to always zoom out. And I'm always, whenever we talk about my brother too, which is all the time, I always want to say how grateful I am that through all of this, a lot of people might have had shame or regret or guilt. And he has always been so open about it. He's always given us permission to talk about his story and talk about our experience with it. And that takes a really big person to do that. So he's no matter what he's going through, he could literally be in psychosis right now. He'd be like, talk about it. I don't care.
Yeah.
He's so, he knows that not only is it important to talk about, but it's important for us to talk about and to share it. And the more honest you are, the more people will tell you the honest parts and the ugly parts of their life too. So we're just always grateful to him.
He should be here right now with us.
I know.
He would be so great. He's so open and he'd be a great part of the conversation. So we'll have to do a follow-up.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yes.
Piggybacking on that, that's the main stigma is that relapse. Because even as someone who has struggled with addiction, and I've seen many people that I love so deeply, and being in AA, sponsoring people and seeing them relapse. And it's something that even I at times don't understand, even though I'm somebody who struggled with addiction. Yeah. Like that just shows you the like true lack of understanding that most of us have when it comes to addiction. Yeah. But it is a hard thing to see, and sometimes I don't really know how to support somebody that doesn't want the help. And like you want it so much for them, but yeah, they don't want it for themselves.
Do you think they don't want it, or are they just not healthy enough to know that they want it?
Really good question.
We don't know.
Really good question.
I think I have a feeling that everybody wants to be well inside. Kind of like there's a lot of people, especially when I was learning about mental illness in the early stages, and a lot of people have come across me like, oh yeah, those people, they don't want help, meaning like people who just they choose to live on the street, they don't want help. I'm like, no, that they do, because nobody with a healthy mind, it goes against our survival instinct to be living on the street. So it just means that they're unstable in some way. So I think I always feel like deep inside, somewhere in there, they want to be healthy. They're just maybe not healthy enough to know that they want to be healthy.
And that timing is everything too, and that's why the hard part for the loved ones that we're always dealing with, that I'm always dealing with, is learning that patience. And because again, you're like, you want to help them, you want to tell them exactly what to do. This is like just the general advice to anybody who reaches out to us all the time on our socials or wherever, who are like, I have somebody who needs help, I don't know how to get through to them, they won't listen to me. Or like somebody did reach out and I don't know what to say, and I don't know how to help them.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just like, you don't have to have the answers, you don't have to fix them, you just have to be there for them until they're ready. And if you continue to be that open door for them, or that shoulder to lean on, without judgment and without trying to fix them or tell them what to do, that when it is the right time, they know that they can go to you, and then you can get them to the resources, get them to help. But it's that patience is really tough because it
can take years.
Yeah.
It could take years.
And obviously if it's an emergency, get them to help them immediately. But for a lot of the time it's that long game. But it's, again, just being that person, consistently showing up for them in the way that they need in that moment.
I hear you. But And also piggybacking on something you said earlier, it's like, where's the boundary and where's the line? Like, when does it get to the point where it's like, this is just hurting me so much to witness and be a part of?
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, I do want to be that like door for you for whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
It sucks to see somebody that you love just hurting themselves in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you do have to create healthy boundaries. And you have to decide what you can handle, how much you can handle.
And that you're not enabling them, because there is a line between being supportive and enabling. And it's,
and what is
again, that's a trial and error situation too. But I that's something we talk about in DBT a lot, is interpersonal effectiveness. And it's figuring out what that relationship is with that person. What goal do you have with that relationship? What do you want?
She brings that up to me all the time when I'm like deciding whether I don't know, do I keep doing this? She goes, well, what would be the goal? What is the goal that you have with this relate? I was like, honestly, what's my goal?
That's pretty good.
I know, right?
DBT.
Yeah.
Honestly, like a DBT, I think was originally created for people with borderline personality disorder. Now it's used for anybody that's dealing with emotional dysregulation and how to help them, especially with self-harm involved. But I'm like, I think everybody should go through DBT, because there's so much you can pull from it that's really helpful, because everybody needs to regulate their emotions at different times,
absolutely.
and to evaluate your relationships and how to deal with really tough ones. Like, you could have a tough relationship at work or in your family that you have to deal with in some way. So anyway, that's my DBT spiel.
Yeah. And I think for parents, I think the hard thing is there's like a fine line, and I think I'm talking a little bit more on the addiction side right now. And so there's the parents that say like, well, I'm going to allow my son or daughter to use, because I would rather have them use under my roof than out in the street. That's, in my opinion, enabling. You don't want to be a part of them killing themselves. You don't want to be a part of them using and getting sicker. But then you have the parents that are like super tough love, and and they go a little bit too far the other way. So you do have to, I just encourage parents, you gotta learn about the disease of addiction, and you have to understand that your child or your loved one is really struggling and really sick, and they're reaching for anything and everything to self-medicate, because they don't know any better. They don't know what else to reach for, and they're desperate right now. So they're reaching for something that they think or hope will make it better, and it might make it better for a short period of time, but it's not the best choice for regulating.
Yeah, and there are and that's where a professional comes in. So that's where if you are a parent or a loved one who's like, what do I say? What do I do? I realize I'm doing this wrong. Like, it can feel very scary, and there are lots of very helpful tools and skills that are either, if you can get into therapy, like that was kind of your pathway into it, or there's lots of like family resources online. There's just so many places you can go, and great books
you can read.
But where I'm struggling to find because you talked about both of the extremes of like enabling and letting my son or whoever use substances in my house because it's safer. I don't want them on the street, or just like fully kick out, go get your shit together.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then come back whenever you're good. Where do we find that? Like, where is that balance? What can that balance look like? Like, how can you still have that door open but like not enable?
Yeah. For me, like what the approach that my husband and I took, and it seemed like it worked for the most part, was you can't use in our house.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to help you, and this is the help that we can give you. We love you, and we want to give you a safe place, but your options right now are to already have that plan in place, and say, but your options right now is to go to this treatment center. This is beyond what we can do, that we can help you. You're very sick right now, and we don't want to be a part of you killing yourself, but this is an option. We think it's a really good option. And a lot of times at first would be like, no way, fuck you, no way, But then he would come back and say, all right, what are we doing? Where are we going? And thankfully he is someone that he does want to be better, and he does the work. He's not always mentally stable enough to know, but that's when you wait for those little windows. And for him, when he's in mania, things that we've learned is the brain, the brain goes into this really interesting loop. And when he doesn't sleep much, but if he kind of crashes out for a little bit, 15, 20 minutes, when he first wakes up, there's like clarity, right? In like about a 10 to 15 minute window.
Wow.
And that's when we can get to him and say, hey, you're really sick right now. We really want to get you somewhere. And he's like, yeah, I know I need help. But then the mania starts to kick in, and then it becomes, so you have to just be like at the ready to have somewhere to go. So during this 2021 big psychosis, and we found a place down in San Diego, we got the team like at the ready, like, okay, I'm going to call you when he wakes up. And you got about a 10 to 15 minute window. And they're like, nope, we got it. So, he woke up and was like, look, I have a place for you to talk to. Just talk to him and see, And he got on the phone and they like talked to him for like 20, 30 minutes. And they just, explained that they knew what he was going through. One of the owners deals with bipolar as well. So he knew exactly what he was going through. And he came back to me, handed me the phone and said, I think this is the place. They get it. So we literally jumped in the car. It wasn't even a day that they were ready to take him, but we're like, we're coming. And so, jumped in the car and, drove down to San Diego.
With treatment, it's like time is of the essence.
Yep.
Yeah, it is. There's a short window whether it's addiction or mental illness, which we've decided that it's under both. It's all mental health.
Yeah.
There's these short windows when somebody's ready, and you just have to be ready with your plan to get them that option. And it may not be the perfect option, but at least you're working toward recovery.
Yeah.
So for us, that's what that happy medium was just don't want to be a part of you using and hurting yourself, but here's an option that we can offer.
And it's never helpful to shove something down somebody's throat.
Yeah.
Like if you're saying like you need to go to treatment right now, it's not really, no, I wouldn't want to do that.
Yeah. I think it's being consistent too, where it's like, again, like you're saying, it's not shoving it down their throat. It's like presenting different options in a very not judgmental way and being vulnerable yourself, and like having it be a conversation where it's not just telling somebody how to fix it, but it's like bringing it up in ways where it's natural, where you're also being vulnerable, and like you're saying, having a plan and having done the research to be like, okay, and here's, love this place. We've had that, heard a lot of great things there, and then letting it go when you need to, and again, that depends on the level of crisis at the time, but yeah.
And when my son's in severe mania and psychosis, he has to go to the hospital. Like it's he's very acute. So unfortunately, we've just learned that there really aren't many places that can handle severe mania and psychosis, and so it ends up being the emergency room, and then he's transferred to a psychiatric hospital, and then you just fight for him to stay in as long as possible so he has the time to try to clear and get some pretty strong medication in him to bring down the mania. But then he really does need that support in treatment for a while after that.
Right.
Because we're not professionals, but, I've heard that it takes the brain a year to heal after an episode.
Really?
And we've seen that with our son, that he'll start to get better in 3 months, 6 months, but he really needs that full year for things to really stabilize.
Correlated, but a little random. I interviewed an interventionist a while ago. I'm curious on what your guys' thoughts are on an intervention. Like, somebody say, like, for example, your son comes home and you guys are just here in the living room and it's like, hey, we have an intervention. We're having an intervention. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a good approach?
Have we ever done an intervention for?
Well, we've been guided on how to do an intervention, but we've never hired anybody to do it.
But did we all sit? We've definitely had like family sit downs before.
Yeah. I think as a concept, it's interesting for them to be able to sit and say, whoa, all of these people that love me, that care about me, are all saying that they're concerned.
Personally, I would be overwhelmed. I would feel almost embarrassed.
It puts that person in a defensive place
Yes.
immediately. There's no way they're not gonna, like, no human being on earth would be like, okay, sounds good, everybody. You're right. Like, it does put you, it does put them in a really tough position. I don't know. It's such a good question. I mean, I think, like you're saying, in theory,
yeah. But I've heard a lot of thoughts on it not being the greatest way to approach it, because it does feel like you're saying kind of put you in a very defensive mode and kind of forcing you into it instead of let's figure this out together kind of vibes.
Because I think the idea of all of your loved ones coming together and being honest about how you're affecting them is a good thing, but in the way where you kind of like trick them into this trap and then like bombard them with a lot of...
I think it's beneficial for the people around the addict.
Yeah.
I think it makes everyone else feel good. Like, yeah, we all came together and we all explained that this needed to happen. But I don't, if you really think about it from the person dealing with it, like, I think those are questions for people who have dealt with it.
That's true.
Yeah.
How did, and have gone through interventions. How
is
was
it
beneficial?
effective? What did that person? Is it like an
She was
effective?
like, yeah,
mode
it's
of-
really rare that nobody goes to treatment after I speak to them.
But then how
Yeah.
long do they stay in treatment?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think she scouts out the treatment centers and makes sure it's a good spot, but they seem to like be at a point where they're willing to
Yeah.
like
That's good.
try recovery.
Because I would imagine at that point too, once an intervention is called, it's like you're deep in it. That doesn't happen early on. That's like after people are afraid for your life, like tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I imagine you got to do something quickly and effectively.
And hopefully maybe, like, even if you're unwillingly, like, well, I guess I have no other choice, at least they're in and maybe it's that first step. And then, hopefully they continue.
How would you describe addiction to somebody that doesn't know the first thing about it?
Well,
Because it's very misunderstood, and it's so hard for people to wrap their minds around picking up a substance that is killing you slowly and hurting those around you.
Yeah.
I mean, I can speak to the way that I learned about it, which blew my mind.
Okay.
Which was at this kind of family week education, and Dr. Harry is his name, Dr. Harry Houtini. Anyway, it's very easy to be really great.
Dr. Harry Houdini.
And he explained that when the brain comes across those sort of primal things, water, food, sex, that the chemicals just go, woo, yes, this is great, And he said sex is actually the highest chemical reaction.
Sex?
Yeah.
Wow.
And he said, but if somebody comes across a substance that's going to be that thing that makes their brain like really light up, he had this little, like, how you hit you're at a carnival and you hit the thing and the bell goes up, So he said, water, food goes pretty high, sex rings the bell. And he said when somebody comes across a substance that they're basically susceptible to being addicted to, their thing goes beyond the bell. Like, it's just sky high. And he says it just wakes up the part of the brain, the primal part of the brain. And it starts to, if you continue to use that substance, it hijacks your thinking about, like, your rational thinking about, this is going to kill me. This is making me lose my family, my job, my whatever, because the brain feels like it's getting the most, survival thing it possibly can. So it gets tricked and hijacked. And so, I mean, that just kind of blew my mind of like, wow, like the struggles that somebody's going through. And he said, unfortunately, that high that you get never comes back. It's never that high. So then you're always chasing the high.
That first high.
Yeah. And so it just made me like have a lot of compassion for people who are dealing with that, because, their brain has hijacked their frontal cortex and their rational thinking into thinking it's a survival instinct. So that's what I learned, and it really sort of helped me understand what's happening chemically in the brain.
For sure.
And I think with any mental health issue, it's a nature versus nurture thing. So there is a genetic component, there is an environmental component. A lot of the time there's trauma interlinked. People turn to substances when there's trauma involved. But there's also, like, sometimes you're just born with that in the same way my brother was born with the predisposition to bipolar. It's the same thing for addiction. And I've just seen, having kind of been on the outside of it through my brother, but like having now been in this field for a long time and meeting so many people, that addicts are some of my favorite people in the world.
Yeah.
On the upside. On the downside, it's some of, you know, the darkest stuff you can experience, and you don't wish that pain on anybody. But I will say that just as a group, and we don't know what the brain science is, but I'll say some of the kindest, most empathetic, creative, emotionally intelligent people out there happen to be addicts as well.
Yeah.
That's so true. I just had a doctor on. He pretty much said the exact same thing about addicts. Like, they're the most talented, ambitious people, but we happen to have this thing in our brain that tells us to keep picking up a substance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, you could be literally a doctor. He personally struggled with addiction, 8 years of medical school. You know what I mean? And like, you can have degrees and all this, and addiction doesn't discriminate.
Yeah.
Anybody can struggle with it.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Do you think there's anything else that needs to be said on this topic, on mental health or addiction?
I think in the space I'm in right now anyway, I think everybody needs to give themselves a break sometimes. I think whether you are somebody who does deal with a mental health issue, which we all do, so that's all of us.
Yeah.
But the stat is 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 people deal with a mental health issue in their lifetime. And that also means that the rest, the 3 out of 4, are dealing with it in some way, whether it's through that person or then with their own things that they need to deal with. So that's all of us. And I think it's a hard thing to talk about because we all carry a lot of shame with it, whether we feel like we didn't handle something the right way, or we weren't there for our loved one in the way that we wanted to, or like you were saying earlier on, how you also mourn the life of the things that you expected for that person or for yourself, and how mental health can change that in a lot of ways. But I just think sometimes just take a moment to give yourself a break for the mistakes you've made, or the way things didn't turn out the way that you thought they would, because we've just seen through our journey, and it's easier for us to say because we're not the one with the serious mental illness, but we've dealt with our fair share of things, and the way our life has changed down this path, even with just creating Don't Mind Me and working together as a family, has been so beautiful. And if we didn't have that grace with ourselves to also be able to forgive ourselves and to look at new ways forward, we wouldn't be where we're at today. So I'm very grateful that we've been able to navigate that as a family, and I encourage everyone to do that for themselves.
Yeah.
I love that.
Amen.
Just like, yep.
Yeah. I mean, we're I say there's no black and white. We're all shades of gray, and the lucky ones get the diagnosis.
Wow.
The rest of us are just clawing our way through.
White knuckling.
White knuckling. And the silver lining is, like, as I said, we were quote unquote mourning the loss of, and
where we thought our son was gonna go.
Yeah, and I just feel like the silver lining is it brought a beautiful thing to our family, and it's brought so much more meaning to even like what I do as an actor. I've always been a reluctant celebrity, and I always want to just do my work, go home, raise my kids. But I saw, there's like some value here where I do have a reach, and I can share our story and hopefully help the next family through. So I'm very thankful for that, and just be easy on yourself.
Yeah.
It's all messy. It's all beautiful.
We're all going through something.
Yep.
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you both taking the time today for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Like, I feel honored. It's been great, and I'm
thanks.
so glad to have been able to meet you both. Thank you, Mina and Mädchen, for coming on FTS.
Thank you.
Same here.
Thank
So
you.
nice to meet you.